Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode with Alex. I am so glad we got to part 3 in our series. Alex has been walking us through how to create blocks. So far, we looked at a big high level kind of overview of creating blocks and also using, of all things, the widget editor to place our blocks where we want them to. That was kind of fun. Last week, we started looking at ACF as well. And this week, I hear we're about to dig into code. So good to have you with us again. Please leave your questions, comments, any ideas that you have over in the chat area. After we're done, we'll go through the Q&A section, and it's your chance to grill Alex because, you know, we're at week 3 and we should have some heavy hitting questions. But really though, Alex, welcome back. Thank you for being with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. Okay, well, so let's just get started, I suppose. Let me get my screen shared here. Well, first I won't share my screen yet. I'll just talk at the screen. So in case you guys, this happens to be your first one, my name's Alex. I'm a web developer. I've been working in WordPress 2009. I started professionally in 2014, and I've just been kind of writing code ever since then. I was around whenever building my own agency and building websites for clients in the mid 10s, like 2014, 2015. We still do it. I still do it some now too, but obviously a lot has changed since then. And I've been very much in the trenches along with everybody else, trying to make sense of how to use the block editor for my agency, for my processes in some way that makes sense. So with that, a lot of, just challenges and paradigm shifts that came with that. But I have since decided that I really do like the block editor. And at this point, I don't really use the classic editor anymore at all, except for on some legacy clients where it's just not practical to make the switch yet. I am at this point now, I mostly am focused on teaching other people. So as you can see, things like this, I write a lot of blog content online. I build some WordPress frameworks and things like that. Over at WPA Dev Academy, I actually have a couple of courses where I teach other people how to build WordPress plugins and WordPress themes and kind of really go deep on writing code inside of WordPress specifically. In fact, after this talk, I'm actually going to go over to my Discord server, which is at community.wpdev.academy. And we're just going to kind of chat a little bit. We've been doing it on after every episode, just kind of, doing like an extended Q&A and just kind of just talking about what was in this talk. So I'd love to see you guys there. If not, no big deal, but I'd love to see you there. So in the last video, we talked a little bit about how the theme locations work with the approach that I'm taking right now, which is using widgets to basically place them throughout the site as predefined locations to put blocks in. And as in time, and not too long from now, actually, that's going to change to where we don't have to do that anymore. You can actually just use the block editor. It's going to natively support doing things like that without using widgets. But for the time being, it makes a lot of sense to just continue to use widgets since it's a backward compatible, friendly way to approach it. And it shouldn't be too terribly hard to upgrade to the modern block editor using the new methods in the future. But even if you don't want to do that and you just want to leave it as it is, it still kind of gives you as much of that functionality as you had before. However, this time we are going to mostly talk about just building a block. I'm not going to build some kind of crazy advanced block or anything like that, nor am I going to just world. I spent a lot of time trying to think about how I can actually provide this. And I think the best way, the most common use case I have for building a custom block is I want to give my customers a preset piece of content, a block, right? That most of the time can be built using other blocks, but I don't want them to be able to change the order of them or anything like that. And I also want them to be able to easily edit it. So it kind of gives you that best of both worlds scenario where, in the classic editor, a very common thing that a lot of people really like is that with ACF or some kind of forms plugin or anything like that, you can set it up to where all the content is fixed, right? You can't really move this stuff around. And you just kind of add the information to it, and the page renders everything using the data you provide. This is a really foolproof way to do it. We talked about that a lot in the first talk and all the disadvantages that come with that. However, with blocks, it's the complete opposite of that, where you have all of this customization ability and all of this power inside of the block editor to be able to move stuff around, and that can really get in the way whenever you have a custom site. So to work with that and to make that a little bit easier to handle, I like to kind of take the best of both worlds, where a block contains a bunch of other blocks inside of it, and you can customize what those blocks say and how they work and all that stuff, but you can't move them around. So ultimately, what we're going to do today is we're going to go over how to build a block that works exactly like that. And you're going to be surprised to find that it's actually not too terribly difficult to set up compared to just building a custom block completely. You definitely have to write some code. You definitely have to know at least a little bit, but it's not the crazy, daunting, hard-hitting wall where you have to know like React really deeply, or understand like complexities of JavaScript above and beyond basic to intermediate levels. So you're going to find that you'll be able to make your own blocks. They'll be very well laid out and quite powerful. So let's go ahead and share my screen real quick. I'm going to pick actually just going to share my entire screen here. Minimize myself. Okay, so what we have here is the homepage that we laid out quickly in the block editor in the last video. So down here we have our block that we made called featured item, and it has web development, or a title, a picture, some text, and a call to action. This is inside of a columns block, and that's why. So there's 3 of them right inside of a columns block. Now, if we go in here and we actually edit this page, you're going to find that this is actually 3 different blocks, but they're rendering the same content. The intent here is to show you the difference between each one of them. So the first one is what we built really early on in the second video. We really just took blocks and we built out this entire featured item. Now, the advantage of this was that the layout advantages that I talked about before and all that stuff. And also it's quick. It's a quick and easy way to be able to just lay out something and figure out what you want to do. Also, of course, the editor is all, you get the full functionality of the editor, so you can, add bold and customize the layout and just do a lot of stuff, everything that the block editor can do. The second example here is actually an ACF block, a block built using ACF. And what we did with this was we actually copy and pasted a lot of HTML code to basically just display the same exact HTML output as this one. However, we used ACF's field editor to actually work with that. So if I click on this block, you'll see the big difference is all of the data related to this block is in the sidebar. And then finally, I have here a block that we're going to go through and build. And, I'm going to show you how to build it. It's actually already built now, but we're going to walk through step by step how it all works and how it was put together. And this is actually just a block that contains nothing but other blocks. In fact, the same exact blocks as this one over here. The key difference is that you can't move these. They're all fixed in location and you can't change their order. You can't change anything about them, but you can change the content of them. So where this one, you can click on this and I can move this up or down and change the layout and perhaps inadvertently mess it up. You can't really do that quite as easily with this block here. Now, the big difference between these 2 blocks, the ACF block and this custom block that was built, is that the editing experience is different. So with the ACF block, you have to go over here to the sidebar and change all of this content directly from here. Now, I don't think that that's as intuitive as the block editor, where you can just directly add stuff. So you can, boy, I chose a heck of a time to say intuitive there, didn't I? But you can just go here, click on this, and change this, right? That's pretty nice. So with that, that just feels more natural to me. And I especially think that would be useful for people who aren't super technologically knowledgeable, right? Super comfortable with computers or whatever. You could just click on it and start typing and it just works. Whereas with this one, it does exactly that because it's still technically just a bunch of blocks. It's just solidified. So this works exactly. Can't move the stuff around. So you can actually go in here and change the stuff manually. And every time you click on a block, you can see the stuff in the sidebar is editable, just like it is over here, just can't be moved. Also, I found that building this one was actually a little bit easier than building this ACF based one because I didn't have to copy or paste any hard-coded HTML. I literally just created a script that says, create a new block, and inside of it, I want it to have nothing but these other blocks. And here's some of the placeholders, and here's some of the stuff that needs to be used whenever it's first set up. And that's it. So if the paragraph block ever updates, or if there's ever any change to some of the markup in the image tag or something like that, I'm going to get all of that for free inside of this block because I'm just using that content anyway. Whereas with this ACF one, it's built completely custom, and I don't really have that as an option. Although we built this ACF one in the same exact way, just by copying and pasting HTML in the last lesson, it's not really the way that I usually work with ACF. Really, I just did it that way just for the sake of speed because there was a lot of content to cover in that lesson. And with this block, is the ACF method is really good whenever you're building a fairly complicated block that can't be broken into smaller, simpler blocks or something like that, or a block that is completely custom and is absolutely not going to use any of the WordPress core blocks or something like that. So if you wanted to build something that's just completely different and specific to your agency, ACF is to start. If you are just really using other blocks and you're just trying to solidify them and kind of lock them together, then you're better off using the method that I'm going to show you with this one. And then, of course, if you don't want to do either of those things and you want all the functionality, don't bother building a block at all and just use the block editor directly. But a lot of times when I'm building sites, I'll just kind of build the elements using the block editor and then just kind of figure out the patterns as I go. And once I start to notice familiar things, I'll register those as proper blocks and then replace them and, kind of figure it out from there. Of course, if you actually have a designer who's already done all that for you, then you already know what blocks you need. Okay, so now that we've kind of gone over the difference between these three, let's just, so we're going to go here into PHP Storm, and we're going to go into our custom blocks.php file. If you're not familiar with PHP Storm, don't let that scare you. Don't think that you have to have PHP Storm to do this. Any code editor will do. In fact, you could even just use the plugin editor that we used last time. If you're, as long as you're not, doing that on a live site, that's not really a good idea. But I prefer to use a code editor for this kind of stuff, so it just makes it a lot easier to understand what's going on. Okay, so this is actually the same. I actually took the block plugin that we created in the last lesson, and I've just kind of expanded on it to start allowing us to add custom blocks. So first and foremost, you can see right here, we're actually grabbing the acf.php file, which is right here. And this just contains all of the stuff for that custom feature block that we had built in the last lesson. I just kind of put it in a separate file so I don't have to see that garbled copy pasted code from ACF. It works fine. I'm never going to touch it. I just want it kind of out of my way so that I know that it works. So I just went ahead and required that. Now right here, this is where the magic happens, really. So this is register block type. And all this is doing is it's actually registering our custom featured item block. Now in older versions of WordPress, whenever you ran register block type, you had to pass the block name as well as a series of arguments, both in PHP and JavaScript. However, as of the newest version, there is a new wonderful, fantastic feature that they finally added called block Json, which basically allows you to put all of your configuration and all of your settings for your block inside of a JSON file. And that file is read both by the PHP and the JavaScript. So most of your information that both PHP and JavaScript needs to know is all wrapped up in this one single file, and it just makes things way easier to work with. You don't have to add custom attributes in 2 different places, and it's really fantastic. So if you happen to have registered blocks in the past and you notice this looks a little different, that's because we're using that new feature. So register block type, and the block type that we're registering is actually a reference to a folder, a directory. So we're going to grab the plugin directory path, which is our root directory of our custom blocks plugin. And then we're digging down into source, blocks, featured item. So source, blocks, featured item. And register block type knows to just automatically look for a file called block.json in that directory. So basically we're telling WordPress, hey, I've got this custom block type that I want you to know about and I want you to use and include. And all the information you need to know about it can be found in this block.json file. So let's open that one up. So you can see this is a pretty simple, pretty bare bones block JSON file. There's actually a ton of other stuff you can add in here. And of course, you can click on the schema and see everything that can be added to it if you want. There's a ton, lots of stuff, lots of really good information about how all of that works. And but for this one, we're just doing a simple block that contains other blocks. So you can see it specifies the name, the title, the category, what the icon is whenever it's referenced in the block editor, a description of it, some keywords, the text domain. This is used for translations, and then the editor script. So this actually is the script that is automatically loaded by the block editor whenever you're in the edit, like the block editor itself. And you can see that it's actually a reference to a file. So it's going up 1, 2, 3 levels. So it's relative to the block file. So 1, 2, 3 levels. So it's going to the root. And then it's digging back into build, featured item block.js. So it's actually going to take this. And basically we're saying this right here is where the script is for editing this block. Okay, so with that registration and all that set up, we now just have to actually create this JavaScript file that will contain all of the stuff needed to actually, edit this block itself. Now you may notice, you may not notice, it depends on your JavaScript knowledge, but this is a compiled file from Webpack, actually. So we're actually not going to edit this file directly. We're actually going to edit a file inside of here, inside of source blocks featured item called x.js. And this file actually contains the register block type, just like we did in PHP, only this time it's in JavaScript, so it's using a different casing. And we are passing some arguments in it specific to the block editor, the editing portion of the block. We'll get into that later, as well as metadata. So it's importing the metadata from block.json, which is the same file that our PHP file is referencing. So they both are referencing and grabbing the data from the same spot. Now, if you're not familiar with how Webpack works or how compiling works or any of that stuff, don't worry too much about that. By default, WordPress does a lot of that heavy lifting for you. But basically what we have is inside of this Webpack file, what this does is it tells WordPress, our plugin, hey, here's the instructions that you need to be able to make this JavaScript file work on all browsers, right? This configure file, we just use the default WordPress settings right here, WordPress scripts. And inside of that, there's one small override. So basically we're using the default configuration by default, but on top of that, I have this other object that can actually override the default configurations. So any of the settings inside of Webpack that WordPress uses that I don't want to use, I can replace it with my own setting. And you can see I did exactly that here by changing the entry file. So the name of the file that Webpack needs to actually compile. And you can see source blocks featured item index.js, source blocks featured item. So basically all I did here was I just said, hey, whenever you run the command to basically make it usable, I need you to actually grab this file right here and save it as featured item block.js inside of the build directory. It does some other things, a lot of things behind the scenes, in fact, but we don't have to worry about any of that. All we have to know is that with that setup, we now have a way to be able to actually look at this script. So just to reiterate again, so we start in the PHP references and says, hey, there's this JSON file here that we need to reference called block.json. And that tells PHP to include this featured item block JavaScript file right here. And the featured item block JavaScript file is actually being created from our index file right here. So there's a lot of files, there's a lot of moving here, but once you get it all set up and it's in place, it's really just a matter of messing with index.js and custom blocks.php. And most of the time, if you're running an agency or something like that, you probably have a boilerplate plugin or a template plugin that you would literally just have all this stuff already set up. And then whenever you need to add a new block, you just, you would add register block type like I did here. You would create a new directory inside of source to create a new block inside of source blocks. So a new block would be created right here. And that would contain a block.json, an index file, and you would just tie everything together like that. And then of course you would also have to add inside of Webpack the reference to the JavaScript file for that new block so that it would actually create it in the build directory. Okay, I know that was a lot, but with that, if we get into our index.js file, you can see here that we have this function called register block type. It's grabbing the data from block.json. And inside of this, we actually are passing an object containing a whole bunch of arguments. Now there's all kinds of things that you can add to this. The only ones that we needed to add for this specific block though are two. We needed to add edit and save. So edit, what this is this tells the block editor what to use, what content to use to display inside of the actual editor itself, inside of the block editor itself. So this is telling it, hey, I need you to display this content, so if you look over at this block right here, it would contain, an image with an overlay, a button, and the ability to add more blocks inside of it. So all of that stuff, all of that magic for this editing experience, this editing interface, including the sidebar and whole 9 yards, all of that comes from whatever you put inside of your edit function, whatever React content you put inside of that. Save what will actually control the content, what it ultimately looks like when you click update or publish or whatever. Whenever the content is saved, this React component, and it will render it. And then it's going to take the HTML markup from that and shove it inside of the content editor and save it. You can also do server-side rendering, which I don't get into this on this video, but I get into that in great detail on my plugin course. But for the sake of this, we don't need to worry about that. So basically, we only have two here. We have edit and we have save. And to even take it a step further, our edit and save are actually using nothing but this one block editor component called inner blocks. And all this component does is it says, okay, I am a container that holds other blocks, and you can provide any block. You could set it up to where you can add any blocks inside of it. This is basically how columns work and stuff like that. So inner blocks, you can click a plus and add more and stuff like that. Or you can set it up to where it works in the context of what they call a template. And basically what you pass is a whole bunch of all of your different blocks that you would use as a template. And it'll just add those and it'll leave them in place so you can't change them, move them around, that is, and give you all the capabilities that come with that. So this is a really powerful way to build these blocks. And then of course on the save, we're actually just running this function that's built into this component that's built into inner blocks called content. And that's all you have to do for save. So you just pass that in and WordPress will just magically handle the rest. So if you look a little bit closer at this, you can see our template contains core heading, the placeholder, and a single placeholder inside of this object with featured item heading. So basically, take the WordPress core block called heading and put it in, put in one called core image. After that, put in one called core paragraph. And again, add a placeholder to specify what needs to be placed there whenever it's not filled out. And then finally, a core button, a single button from WordPress core that featured item call to action. And you could put in anything you want here. If I wanted to add more, I could just simply add a new one. Maybe I want to add another paragraph after the button. I don't really know why I'd want to do that, but for the sake of this presentation, you can just do core.paragraph and then say placeholder and maybe even more text afterward. And once you do that, it will then the block to include that paragraph afterward on all of those blocks. Now you also have to run a command that you have to run called npm run start, and that's using WP scripts. So I have all these scripts built into my package.json file here. And basically these are just using the WP scripts library to compile all of this stuff for us. So I have one called start here, and just behind the scenes, it runs WP scripts start. So if you're working from a plugin from scratch, you would run npm install to install it. And then after all that, the scripts and all that stuff's all installed, you can then run these different functions here. And I've got a link to a boilerplate that this is all based on, and I'll be happy to share that with you guys so that you have access to this and can work with it. Okay, so whenever we run start, basically what that does is it will watch this file, and anytime the file changes, it automatically compiles it and updates featured item block so that our block editor actually works. So if we go back over to our file here and we reload this page, you're going to see even more text afterward. So now I can add more text right here. And all I had to do was pass in an array to specify that. I didn't have to write any React. I didn't have to create any custom components. I didn't have to do anything. I just had to tell it, hey, after the button, put a paragraph in. And most of the time, that's going to work really well. If you want to get fancy, you could even add a column. You could do like a columns block, and inside of that, you could contain, individual blocks inside of that. So you could really pre-build entire web pages if you wanted. I mean, if you wanted to go full on and really get that ACF feel to it, you could theoretically build a block that's just an entire page layout if you wanted an entire page template layout or something like that. I don't really think that's the way to go about it, but if that's your cup of tea or for some reason that makes sense, by all means, you could accomplish that too, where you just build an entire page layout using nothing but this template with the array containing all the data, and then just allow them to just go through and fill out the individual pieces of it without actually being able to change any of the content therein. So there's plenty of ways that you can, just using this method, you can go about this. So let's reload that again. Show you how that worked. Okay, good. So it's gone now. And if I go down here and I click right here and I click featured item, it's going to work just like a regular block. So it says featured item heading. It has the image container and the featured item content, as well as the call to action. So we can just add that in directly. Something like this, maybe. Have another image. We'll go with that one. I like to get rid of this caption for this particular context, and then just add some content here. So we like to build, and maybe, so you can see how just like that, I've got this really nice built-in block that I know what to do with. I know how to use. I can click on the smiley face to move it up and down. I can click right here and you can actually see the featured item here, and it actually shows the individual items inside of it, whereas the ACF is just a single, block. So you kind of get a little bit more, a little more information there, and it kind of just, I don't know, I like it a lot. I think it's a really cool way to go about it. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. Oh, probably. Sometimes the block editor gets me too. So every once in a while, whenever this happens to me and I can't figure out how in the world to get rid of it, I'll have to actually go into the code editor and scroll down to the bottom and grab this custom blocks featured block and just delete it completely. I don't like having to do this, but every once in a while, and I'm able to tell it starts because WP custom blocks featured item block, and I can see where it ends right here. It's happened sometimes. It's pretty annoying, to be perfectly honest, but they're working on it and it's always getting better. So now if we view the page, you can see that the content just basically rendered right there. So that's kind of the key piece of this. I know this is a little bit shorter than the other ones. My goal was to make it last 30 minutes, 40 minutes, maybe, just kind of showing you this one really cool idea. And I wanted to just kind of give plenty of time to ask questions because like Courtney had mentioned, this is our last one. So I just wanted to make sure there's plenty of time. If you guys had any other questions about all three of these, we can take some time to figure out those answers to those questions. So let's go ahead and start with that, shall we? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And hi.
Hey there. Yeah. So you got about as far as I previously had with creating blocks. I've done a little bit more than that.
Yeah.
But I think that was before list view came along. That list view is so helpful for us to be able to. I find when I'm writing posts, even the toolbar will get in my way and I want to get at a certain thing. That list view is the way to do it. For sure.
For sure.
I would love for some questions to start coming in. So if you have some questions for us, please drop them. I think digging into the code can feel a little intimidating the first few times around. I have shared links in the chat to the community area. If you need a super lightweight code editor, Visual Studio Code has launched in the last week in the browser. And you can sign in through your GitHub account. And so vscode.dev in the browser will let you right on into a code editor. It still doesn't really hook up to your WordPress site that way, but we're working on it. And the last link, if you want to check it out, is to developer.wordpress.org into the block editor where it talks about block.json and all the starter stuff you need in that particular file. But that said, what questions does the audience have for us? I know we had a couple people that needed to head out due to Florida weather being what Florida weather is. I do see a couple questions starting to come in. Alex, you mentioned dropping a link for some code while you were demonstrating. Do you have the link?
I'm doing that
Jeffrey
right
asks
now.
us. Thank you so much.
So this is a boilerplate that I use for my plugins. It's running a WordPress library that I've built over the years called Underpin. I haven't showed that in the examples here because it just added some unnecessary complexity for the simple examples that we have here. It's really cool though, and a really good way to kind of build really big scalable plugins. But some of the key components in that, even if you don't want to use Underpin, you can pretty easily use this boilerplate because it has the Webpack set up in the way that I showed you in this video. It has the package.json set up. It also has documentation how to actually start using it. And then on top of all of that, of course, it has a it just has all of those modern tooling and all the things that are used to be able to build plugins like what I did. So literally what I did whenever I built this plugin was the plugin that I showed in this presentation, that is that I literally took it and I just wiped everything out of the root plugin file. So that would be the bootstrap.php. I literally just got rid of all of the code, like the function plugin name replaced me and everything else, and just started. The only thing in this boilerplate that's specific to Underpin, you rip that out and there's nothing else in it, and it's just a regular old WordPress boilerplate. So I've been using it for a while now, and it's been pretty solid. So there you go. I hope that helps.
It reminds me, doing a simple block like this reminds me of taking us back to Hello Dolly.
Yeah.
You know how simple plugins and all of it can be. Now that one is not even publicly visible when you activate it, but taking us back to the most simple of blocks as a good place to get started.
Yeah.
I think if you start into, I want to build a block that does a lot of complex steps for the person entering the data, and might also have a lot of administration settings to configure, and does a lot with a lot of the data, that's biting off a really big project. So starting with something that is a fairly straightforward block where you're just putting a little bit of content maybe in and customizing your smiley there. Good stuff. Very good stuff.
And I think just to expand on that a little bit, you know, oftentimes I'll build something with ACF first, or I'll and kind of like to prototype it basically to like figure out how it works. And then at that point, that's whenever I would go in and actually build the components using React and all that stuff. And like today, for example, I built a block with it. Like basically built this featured item block without doing the array-based method that I showed you there. And it took me about 3 hours to get something that was even usable. And it was just nowhere near as nice as the child block example that I gave. And the child block example I gave, to be honest, it didn't take me any more time to set that up than it takes me to set up an ACF one. So it's, you know, it's pretty quick, it's pretty straightforward. And once you have all the different pieces put together, and if you're a developer, you're probably pretty comfortable with that packaging process anyway, or at least you have worked around it enough to know a little bit.
Yeah.
But the times where you end up building a custom React-based block it's not common. There's not a lot at this point. Like a couple years ago, maybe, but they have so many different blocks out there, and just in core, that, you know, the combinations are just endless, and you'll find that you really don't have to build a lot of custom stuff anymore. Most of the time you're just assembling some blocks and setting it up.
Definitely feels like playing with my kids' Legos by now.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure. So, but I could be building some complicated things with those Legos. You know, I'm not seeing, folks, do we have some more questions? I did say we need to grill Alex. Alex, can you describe, after the first time that you built a block like this, what was the next hardest thing? Like, walk through, if somebody were new to creating both plugins and blocks, because essentially a block is often coming in the form of a plugin.
Right.
Can you tell us what would be a couple of challenges after they feel good about this? What should they start looking at next, and then next? And also, at what point should they consider going through the course that you've got that teaches a little more advanced methods? Yeah,
sure. So there's a couple of different things to say about that. I would say the next step would be to really build Hello Dolly or Hello World or some kind of really dead simple one, and just choose to not use this child block inner block method that I showed here. And you'll find that most of the time, whenever you have to create a custom block, the reason why is either one, because it's easier for it to be rendered server side, or two, you're doing something where you're saving data to the database in a weird way that isn't normal. Stuff, that's whenever it gets okay, we kind of, you got to think about how you're setting this up and how it all works. And it kind of gets a little more complicated from there. So I would say just building a basic, block of that nature. Another time where it makes a lot of sense to build a completely custom block is going to, of course, be if you're building your own plugin, right? So if you're building a plugin that's you're planning on distributing or something like that, and it's, a custom post type, maybe, that's when, and maybe you need to build custom blocks that work maybe specifically with that custom post type. A recipe comes to mind, right? So if you're building some kind of really good syntax for a recipe, maybe the actual block itself that actually renders that recipe is all custom because, you've got to add all that extra metadata, the JSON LD and all that stuff. So there's all kinds of different circumstances where, what the block editor is just doing it this way won't work. But if you're building websites for clients, this is going to be perfectly fine pretty much all the time. Whenever it comes to getting into my plugin course, so the plugin course actually does we actually build a WordPress plugin on beer. So you're building a craft beer management. Basically, it's a beer lister tool, really. And it features a custom post type, and then inside of that post type, you actually customize the block editor itself. So the whole sidebar area on the beer post type has like the ABV, the IBU, and all these other different things specific to beer. And then the block editor content section itself is actually just wide open and designed to be used for, just displaying that individual beer's page. And then from there, you can we also create a custom block that will allow you to display your beers in a list on your web on anywhere on the site. So it kind of works like the query post query block that came out recently, but it's specifically for this. So you can filter, by the ABV, you can sort it by the IBU if you want, and you can do all kinds of stuff, and it pre-renders the content, and it shows you how you can set up your blocks so that, if a theme developer comes in and they want to override the markup of that block in their own theme, they can do that. And like it kind of gets into a lot of the complexities that kind of come in with full-on plugin development, where you're trying to make this thing as customizable and extendable as possible for everybody, So yeah. Definitely recommend it. Of course, maybe I'm a little biased because I recorded it, but it's a pretty solid next step if you're looking to really get into, if you know the basics of JavaScript, PHP, and you're at least a little bit comfortable with React. It's a really good resource that'll basically, by the time you're done with that, you'll be able to build any custom blocks pretty comfortably. You'll know enough to know how to find the things you need to know to really go deep. And of course, that would work very well in pretty much any circumstance, whether or not you need to go deep. So,
yep. So often, I said that often a block comes inside of a plugin, but I think you've got some plans happening with your courses that are beyond plugins. What else is next?
Yeah. So I'm also working on another course that's coming out sometime next year, where we are taking this novel approach to building a WordPress theme called nearly headless development. So basically, it's this like you have these people who are building these sites in this approach called headless WordPress, where it's like really fast and really modern, and you're using all these really super hip, cool tools and all this stuff. And then you have people who are building WordPress the traditional PHP way, where it's a little more old school but really reliable, and you can get pretty good results on either one. But a lot of people have found that headless is great, but the problem with it is that it eventually you don't get a lot of stuff for free with it, whereas with the core, so for example, if you want to add a contact form to your website, right, with a traditional website, it just works, right? I mean, because that's what they do. It's built exactly like it's intended to be. Whenever you get into headless, all of a sudden you have to like integrate and rebuild the form and re-render the form and make it to where it connects to their REST API. And there's just all this extra stuff that you have to do.
And getting blocks and plugins to talk to other systems.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So it's not that great if you're just building a WordPress website, right? But I've created this method that I've coined as nearly headless. And basically what it is it gives us as developers the tools needed to be able to build a website in very similar to how we build websites in headless. But it also gives you the opportunity to, on any given page, make it load using traditional WordPress instead of headless. And it works as a normal WordPress theme. It doesn't do anything, like weird where you have to do some kind of weird deployment. Like it'll work with any of your managed hosting deployment processes or any of that stuff. And it's really fast. And actually I've got a good demo of it is at nearlyheadless.dev, nearly-headless.dev. And you can see like how very fast this site is. It's crazy how fast it is compared to any other WordPress site. And this is running on a really basic host. It's not, it's not anything over the top for that. But definitely taking that, we're going to, and next year, I'm going to actually do a course on how to do it. The source code to actually build your own version of this theme is actually available at github.com/ I think it's Nicholas-WP. Maybe let me just make sure.
Thanks.
I think it's Nicholas-WordPress. Yeah, here we go. I'll share that in the link real quick. But that's a really cool one. And the Nearly Headless Dev site, by the way, is actually using the exact methods that I just showed you guys here. So it's not using any custom blocks or anything, crazy over the top in terms of that. It's literally just using good old-fashioned WordPress, really good modern block editor practices, and the theme itself is just using JavaScript in a really clever way to like make it just load really fast. So next year I'll be doing a course on that, going in great detail how all of that works and how to build your own.
Very cool. Thank you very, very much. Before we say goodbye for the day, I do want to draw attention. We've got more events coming up in GoDaddy Pro. Often they are on Wednesdays. Some of the ones that I've been kicking off around development happen to be scattered throughout the week. We've been with Alex on Thursdays. I'll try to keep with that. Tentatively, I have one in the works. I feel safe enough to announce this. Josh Pollock has launched a tool that helps you make the plugin, and I've been previewing it for a little bit, and it looks pretty fun. So we'll have Josh on to show us a little bit about the plugin machine and how to make lots of plugins with that tool. It'll be great. Also coming up, there is another event in the works if you're interested in development-related events. Here is the link for how to check out everything happening in Gutenberg that was built yesterday and the code compiled. So you don't have to wait until WordPress 5.9 comes out to get new Gutenberg features. You don't have to wait until the Gutenberg plugin itself is updated. You could get what they worked on yesterday all set up on your site with just a couple quick uploads and making it check if you've been updated. So feel free to jump in to either of those. We do have a series still running. It's about to wrap up on getting your websites ready for the holidays. If you are doing e-commerce related websites, I really hope that you're ready for the holiday sales rush. And I wish you well, that you do not have any shipping concerns if for any reasons. But that said, thank you all so much for being with us, and you could hop on out. Alex, again, could you tell us the link for your Discord server?
Yeah, sure. It's community.wpdev.academy. And we'll, like we said before, I'll be over there just kind of chatting a little bit more about all this stuff. Hope to see you there.
Thank you all.